Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today we are here to discover the answer to a grand hypothetical, being could the Phantom Troupe defeat Meruem's Royal Guard? Note, not Meruem himself, just the Royal Guard. And I find this to be a particularly fascinating question because the immediate knee-jerk reaction to that sort of inquiry would generally be, nope, absolutely not, the Troupe will get crushed like bugs by bugs. Whereas after having thought about it, I think it might actually be the other way around. Diving into the Troupe actually reveals some pretty terrifying possibilities. The most terrifying of which is obviously the prospect of subscribing to the New World Review, which will have the side effect of granting you regular Hunt Hunter content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. I know, it's a scary thing, but we all need to overcome our fears right here and now by pushing this button. Let me know how you do in the comments below. But before getting into this, I should probably define which Phantom Troupe I'm talking about, by which I mean the exact composition of the crew, because it has changed over time, and our band in the Succession War arc look quite different to our York New City group. For the sake of putting them up against the Royal Guard, I'm going to be using the Phantom Troupe during the Chimera Ant arc, so that we have a roughly time-appropriate comparison. And to recap who we have on hand, well, that would be Phaeton, Finks, Shizuku, Bonolanov, Kaluto, Nobunaga, Kotopi, Shalnak, Franklin, and Chrollo. Yes, Chrollo. Canonically, he actually got his Nen back during the Chimera Ant arc because you can see Hisoka and Abengane approaching him on the cover of chapter 201, where Chrollo also appears to be reading a copy of Weekly Shonen Jump, which is a very fun nod, but as a result, yes, our leader can participate. Meanwhile, for our Royal Guard, we of course have our well-known and well-loved Neferpito and Menthutha as well as the almost universally despised Shiapuf. And I would like to start by analyzing the skill set of the Royal Guard because what became very apparent to me whilst looking at this topic is that they really don't have particularly useful combative abilities, and those that do exist are quite shockingly basic. So for example, Pito developed their Hatsu pretty much in an effort just to entertain themselves. Dr. Blythe is a healing ability that, if used, leaves Pito extraordinarily vulnerable and practically unable to protect themselves. Meanwhile, puppeteering could be a useful manipulation power, except it requires the target to have been operated on with Dr. Blythe, and that is going to be quite a rough condition to fulfill. All Pito really has to their name is Terpsichore, which merely enhances Pito's physical prowess beyond natural limits. As for Shiapuf, he does have a few useful tricky things like Beelzebub, which will make annihilating him quite difficult, but his spiritual message Hatsu was developed for the purpose of basically corralling cattle for the king, and his cocoon power, which grants Nen abilities to others, is going to be useless because it takes at least 24 hours to take effect. Hoof can also change his body to mimic others, so that might be useful, but in the end he is also pretty much just left in a physical standoff. As is Yuppie, who has no abilities whatsoever outside of bodily enhancement, manipulation, and general ragey blasty goodness. And with all of this in mind, the Royal Guard just don't have a particularly strong win condition. For them, they simply need to rip their opponents to pieces with their bare hands, or with their cat hands, I suppose, and that is going to be problematic against this particular group of people. Because the Phantom Troupe are the exact opposite, really. They are a group of highly skilled and efficient Nen users who have developed abilities for the very key purpose of survival, and together those abilities complement and enhance every other member of the troupe. Furthermore, they also have one of the greatest geniuses in Hunter x Hunter to instruct them on exactly how to implement said powers. Because Chrollo really is the key to everything, not so much because of his abilities, but because he is the only person in this world capable of making the troupe work together as a cohesive unit. And also he is without a doubt more intelligent than any one of the Royal Guard. He will dissect them with ease and implement a strategy to deal with them, of which there are many options because the troupe have a wide array of win conditions as opposed to the singular condition of the Royal Guard. And the first of which comes in the form of Finks. He is an often overlooked character in favor of Chrollo or Phaeton, but under these conditions his Nen ability is devastating. In case you need a refresher, it's called the Ripper Cyclotron, whereby his aura increases with every rotation of his arm, allowing him to punch an opponent at, well, I suppose pretty much any force. In theory, there is no limit to Finks' ability. He could just keep rotating on and on and on into eternity, potentially reaching the point where he could even one-punch man Meruem out of existence. The trade-off is, of course, the time it takes to prepare his attacks, which to dispatch of a Royal Guard will be a pretty incredible amount of rotations. I mean, to beat a basic Nen using Chimera Ant, Finks used 15 rotations, although he did go on to say that less than half of that would have been necessary. So if he got that number up into the hundreds, perhaps even thousands, we are undoubtedly looking at a pretty dead Royal Guard on impact. And a prime target for this would be Pito because they are surprisingly fragile. Yuppie is much more of a tank, so using Ripper Cyclotron on him could be a bit of a risk, and Poof can survive by splitting into smaller bodies, so Pito would be the correct target, but it would still be a pretty devastating attack if used on any one of them. And Finks would be allowed to charge this up because the Phantom Troupe have the incredible advantage of numbers and endless ways that they could stall, kite, and distract the Royal Guard. And if one of them does get injured in the process, well, there's always Marchi to just string them back up. Then it would be all about creating an opportunity for Finks to strike. But the best part is that after the initial Ripper Cyclotron, the remaining guards would of course be wary of Finks, at which which point Crawler could just take his ability, and while the guards are wary of Finks, Crawler could just quietly charge up a second round of Ripper Cyclotron in the background because it really is one of the more absurd abilities in the series. And it's also not the only win condition that the Phantom Troupe have. In fact, it's not even the easiest condition to meet. And here we now turn to Crawler himself, who has an ability called Fun Cloth, which he stole from Owl, one of the Shadow Beasts. And as far as we know, Owl is still alive, and Crawler still has the Fun Cloth in his book. And just quickly, because Crawler gets, he gets complicated in combat, the abilities he has access to in this hypothetical are restricted to the ones we've seen up until the Chimera Ant arc, or ones that he can borrow from fellow troop members. And this is relevant because in the manga he now has this whole slew of Hatsu, which we will just temporarily forget about for the sake of this video. Doesn't matter anyway though, because Fun Cloth is capable of shrinking anyone who ends up in it and effectively traps them until the user decides to uncover them. It's almost like being stuck in a pocket dimension, and if it were to take effect, then that does take one whole Royal Guard out of the fight. And it would probably be best used on either Pito or Yuppie. Shiapuf is a problem once again because even if he does get shrunk, he can potentially escape the cloth through the Beelzebub ability, in the same manner by which he slipped through Moral Smoky Jail. He's a very, very slippery butterfly. Boof is by far the biggest problem to the troop, but only in that it's very difficult to kill him, not so much that he's particularly threatening in any way. Meanwhile, Yuppie can be easily outsmarted, and Pito operates on sheer natural instinct, neither of which are phenomenal options against the entirety of the Phantom Troupe. So what's another way to potentially deal with the Royal Guard? Well, we also have a fairly obvious option with Shalnak's Black Voice. There's something quite beautiful about pure manipulation, which is that once the conditions have been fulfilled, that's kind of that. If somehow the troop were able to equip a Royal Guard with one of Shalnak's 2 antennae, then they're just plain done. The only one who has any defense against it whatsoever is Neferpito, because if Pito was using Terp Sakura at the time, which manipulates them, then Shalnak's antennae would be unable to take control, due to the whole manipulator first come first serve rule. So for targets, we would be looking at either Yuppie or Poof. Poof might be a problem yet again because let's say he splits himself and we take control of one of his bodies, it's kind of unclear what would happen to the other separate Poofs. These are the one-hit KO victories though, landing a fully charged Ripper Cyclotron, capturing a guard in the Fun Cloth, or taking control of them with Black Voice. All of which are pretty fantastic options, but that doesn't mean we're out of choices though. One fun combination to think about is actually Shizuku and Kalato, because Kalato has a Hatsu known as Dance of the Serpent's Bite, which rains down seemingly harmless confetti upon an opponent, completely harmless until one piece of paper gets stuck, after which point Kalato is capable of dealing pretty severe damage, even to Nen-wielding Chimera Ants. But the real beauty of this is that Kalato doesn't need to deal the finishing blow at all. What we really need are just a couple of wounds, after which point Shizuku could invoke Blinky to drain the Royal Guard of all their blood, which does of course only work if we can keep Shizuku safe, Kalato as well for that matter, but it is a potentially devastating combination. And in terms of dealing sheer damage, I will mention Phaeton's Pain Packer, but I also think that this is one of the more risky ideas. It basically allows him to transmute pain inflicted upon him in battle into, well, aura of his choosing, the only example of which we have was the Scorching Heat of the Rising Sun Hatsu. And this could work. The problem is that it involves Phaeton actively taking damage, which is very risky, because if a Royal Guard does manage to strike Phaeton, or any member of the troop really, then that could result in an instant death. Physically, the Royal Guard are all extraordinarily dangerous, and close combat should really be avoided, unless the troop have any one of the 3 one-hit win conditions ready to go. Although one way the troop may be able to use the Pain Packer is if they damage Phaeton rather than the Royal Guard, but it's still a very risky idea, because the damage radius could decimate the other troop members as well. For incredible damage, I would say Benolanov is a potentially better option, because he can conjure this miniature Jupiter that strikes opponents at the speed of sound, and is completely inescapable so long as the target is within earshot of Benolanov's beautiful music. With that said, I'm unsure if Jupiter would be powerful enough to actually take out a Royal Guard, which is ridiculous because it's one of like the strongest attacks we've ever seen in Hunter x Hunter, but I would not be surprised to see any one of the 3 managing to survive it. Benolanov also has a very maybe useful ability called Cantabile Metamorphosin, where he can allegedly transform into quote different things, perhaps even mimic the bodies of others, which could be useful as a distraction, like if say he was able to transform into Finks and act as a decoy or something. That's extremely speculative though, and I've tried to avoid that kind of talk thus far because here's the thing. We still know very, very little about the full capabilities of the Phantom Troupe. I mean, there are members we haven't even spoken about here at all, like Nobunaga for example, whose Nen abilities are still completely unknown. We don't know the full extent of Franklin either, or Phaeton for that matter, because it's heavily implied that he has other forms of the Pain Packer suit that each have different fuel requirements for various different outcomes. So we're really only scratching the surface with this group, and we still have all of these possibilities to deal with the Royal Guard. Meanwhile, when it comes to the Ants, we are aware of their full capabilities, and apart from their physical prowess, I have to say it isn't all that impressive. For the most part, their abilities were created to either entertain themselves themselves or to serve a greater purpose for the king. They're not designed with a particular efficiency in mind, and certainly not for pure combat and survival. Which is why, for example, Pito has such an awkward and costly healing mechanism with Dr. Blythe, whereas Manchi of the Troupe has a very potent and time-efficient healing ability. So not only do the Phantom Troupe have access to a much broader pool of powers, they're also just significantly more optimized for the task at hand. And even if a couple of the Troupe members were to fall to the overwhelming power of the Royal Guard, there's still so many of them remaining, and as long as Krollo stays alive, he will be able to formulate a winning strategy. Which is another thing to point out, I suppose. The Royal Guard do not work very well together. They each have entirely different fighting styles and varying personal motivations, and worst of all, the curse of youth and inexperience. They've only been in this world for a couple of months, and that becomes very obvious in regards to the various mistakes they make and character arcs that they need to embark on. Meanwhile, the Phantom Troupe are a legion of grizzled veterans. They're not as strong as the Royal Guard, but they're far more experienced and much more well equipped to take on any challenge that comes their way, so long as that challenge is not the Ant King Meruem. However, when it comes to the Phantom Troupe versus the Royal Guard, I quite firmly believe that the Troupe would comfortably take this. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunter x Hunter content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunter x Hunter glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.